Hello and welcome to a new video. In this video we are going to learn about two cases which were there during the Supreme Court which was established in 1774. This is module 1.2 of semester 3 for the second year BA LLB course. We are going to learn about Kamalluddin case and Cossijurah case. These are the two cases which we are going to learn in the same video. And this is very interesting also, along with the previous trials of Nand Kumar and Radhacharan and now this, and the Patna case also as well. So these are quite interesting cases and they all tell us how and what kind of conflict used to arise between the jurisdiction and authority of the Supreme Court and the company's courts. These are the four different courts that were set up by the judicial plan of 1772, 1774 and 1780 of Warren Hastings. So let us go into the background of Kamalluddin's case. Kamalluddin was a Muslim inhabitant living outside the city of Calcutta. Important is that he was living outside the city of Calcutta, where because of instructions, because of the unclear instructions in the Charter Act of 1773 as to what was the jurisdiction of Supreme Court, there was a lot of ambiguity. There is no clarity as to the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. Therefore, anyone living outside Calcutta also was arrested, or contempt of court was made out on people staying outside Calcutta as well. So he was involved in a domestic dispute related to marriage, maintenance and family obligations. This dispute reached the Supreme Court through a petition filed by one of the relatives who believed Kamalluddin had acted improperly under the Muslim personal law. So this is the background. So this is very important to understand what has happened. This case became important because the Supreme Court tried to enforce its authority beyond Calcutta, even on matters involving purely Indian personal laws. Earlier in the Patna trial, we had seen how the Supreme Court tried to interfere in the matter of arrest of Foot, and how it issued contempt notices on the company officials when they did not adhere to the orders of the Supreme Court. So this dispute reached the Supreme Court through a petition filed by one of the relatives who believed Kamalluddin had acted improperly under the Muslim personal law. Now, this case became important because Supreme Court tried to enforce its authority beyond Calcutta, even on matters involving purely Indian personal laws. Now, what was the working of the Supreme Court in this particular case of Kamalluddin? The Supreme Court accepted the petition even though the dispute was between Indians. It was based on Muslim law and it was outside Calcutta. The court accepted it on the ground that the petitioner voluntarily approached the Supreme Court and therefore the court could hear it. A British style summons was issued on Kamalluddin, but Kamalluddin argued that since he lived outside Calcutta and he was not a British subject, so the court had no authority over him. But the court insisted on his appearance and refused to accept his objection and demanded his presence. The Supreme Court used English legal procedures and demanded evidence in written form. The witnesses were examined under oath and Muslim personal law was completely ignored. When Kamalluddin refused to appear before the Supreme Court, he was punished for contempt. And because he ignored the court's summons and did not attend, the Supreme Court charged him with contempt of court. The case clearly showed that the Supreme Court was extending English law into areas meant for the company adalats. These are the civil adalats that were set up by Warren Hastings. And it shows that how Supreme Court aggressively went into jurisdiction outside of Calcutta. The Supreme Court was also ignoring boundaries between civil and personal laws, and it was asserting powers even outside Calcutta. So these were the main main issues arising because of which the conflicts arise. What was the significance of Kamalluddin's case? It demonstrated the Supreme Court's attempts to dominate Indian personal law cases. It proved that the court was willing to overrule distance and jurisdictional limitations. It caused fear among Indians living in the interiors. It increased political tension between company administration and the Supreme Court. Also, it led to the Act of Settlement of 1781. Now let us look at Cossijurah case or Cossijurah contempt case. It is very similar to the previous case of Kamalluddin. Now what is the background in this particular case? Cossijurah or Cossijurah was a village in Bengal located far outside of Calcutta. Now here there was this zamindar who had borrowed some money from a person. So that creditor filed a complaint in the Supreme Court. Now court began issuing orders affecting people living far beyond Calcutta also. The company objected, saying that the Supreme Court had no authority in that region. Now what were the events of the Cossijurah case? The Supreme Court took up the case on the basis that it had taken up the case, although the dispute had occurred outside of Calcutta and it involved Indian parties and was under the company's revenue jurisdiction. It is very important, these 3 points, that the Supreme Court took up this case despite it had no jurisdiction outside of Calcutta. Both the parties were Indians and this involved the company's court revenue jurisdiction and not the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. But the Supreme Court still accepted it because the creditor had filed the case voluntarily. This was the reason given by the Supreme Court as to why it accepted the case. Next, what happened was the court issued writs to the zamindar to be present before the court. But the zamindar ignored the writ, saying that he was living outside of Calcutta and the court had no jurisdiction or power over him. But the Supreme Court sent a sheriff, that is the court officer, to arrest him. But the Supreme Court, because this was a contempt of court this was basically contempt of the court, and therefore because the zamindar refused to appear, it automatically became a contempt of court. But when the sheriff went to arrest the zamindar, the company officials prevented it by refusing it, because the sheriff had to approach the local police to arrest the zamindar, and local police used to come under the company officials' control. The company officials prevented the sheriff from arresting, and also there was this administrative officers as well as local police who completely refused to help the sheriff in arresting the zamindar. Now this caused a clash between the Supreme Court, which is basically it was established through the Royal Charter. It is also known as the King's Court or Crown's Authority, and the company's administration. The sheriff returned without arresting the zamindar, and the Supreme Court charged the company officers with obstruction of justice. This created a direct conflict between the judicial authority of the Crown and the administrative authority of the East India Company. What is the importance of the Cossijurah case? It showed that the Supreme Court's expansion outside Calcutta was causing administrative breakdown. Here it is important to understand that this was an administrative jurisdiction of the company and not the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. It also revealed the unclear boundaries of judicial power under the Regulating Act. There was no clear separation of powers defined under the Charter Act of 1773. It also exposed the conflict between English law and the company's territorial administration. The case became a first major factor leading to the Act of Settlement of 1781, which limited the court's jurisdiction strictly to Calcutta and British subjects living there. These 2 points are very important. In the Act of Settlement of 1771, the court's power or court's jurisdiction was strictly limited to Calcutta and only on British subjects who were living there and not on Indians. Let us quickly revise. Kamalluddin's case was Muslim inhabitant living outside Calcutta. Supreme Court claimed jurisdiction in personal law matters also. A summons was ignored by Kamalluddin and hence contempt of court was established and court punished him. This showed court's outreach into Indian personal law. So important point in Kamalluddin's case is that it was related with Indian personal law or Muslim law in which Supreme Court tried to interfere. In the Cossijurah case, this was a matter between a zamindar and a creditor. Again, zamindar was staying outside of Calcutta. The Supreme Court issued him writ, which he resisted and which he did not accept. When the sheriff went to arrest, he was obstructed by the company officials. Therefore, the Supreme Court issued contempt of court against the company officials and the administrative officials. This led to a major conflict between the company court and the Supreme Court. This was also one of the major causes, this case was one of the major causes of Act of Settlement of 1781. Now let us look at the mind map of Kamalluddin's case. What was the background? An Indian Muslim living outside of Calcutta. So what did the Supreme Court do? It issued summons. English law was applied and he was tried for contempt of court because he refused to appear before the Supreme Court as he was staying outside of Calcutta. And he argued that since he was outside Calcutta, Supreme Court had no jurisdiction over him. What was the impact? There was a lot of jurisdictional confusion over what was the authority and reach of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also interfered in the personal laws of Indians. And this was the basis for the reforms of 1781. All of these previous trials also were the basis for the Act of Settlement of 1781. Let us look at the mind map of Cossijurah case. What was the background? This was a dispute in a village outside of Calcutta. There was a zamindar who had borrowed money from a creditor and this creditor filed a case in the Supreme Court. What did the court do? Court issued a writ to the zamindar to appear before him. But the zamindar refused to appear, saying that he was staying outside the territory of Calcutta. A court sheriff was sent to arrest him. But the company officials and the company administrative officials and the police did not support sheriff in arresting this zamindar. When the sheriff returned back to the Supreme Court issued contempt of court notice against the company officials and the administrative officials. This led to contempt proceedings. What was the significance of this case? There was a clash with the company. The Supreme Court overreached its jurisdictional powers. This led to the Act of Settlement of 1781 and thereafter it led to a clearer jurisdictional boundaries of the Supreme Court. Let us go through the MCQs now. Kamalluddin's case involved which type of dispute? So Kamalluddin's case involved personal law, the dispute related with personal law. Kamalluddin lived outside of Calcutta, therefore he argued that Supreme Court had no jurisdiction over him. The Supreme Court punished Kamalluddin for contempt of court. The Cossijurah case involved a zamindar. Cossijurah was located again outside of Calcutta. The Supreme Court's writ in the Cossijurah case was resisted by the company officials because they refused to help the sheriff. In both cases, the Supreme Court applied English laws. The sheriff in the Cossijurah case was sent to arrest the zamindar. A failure of the sheriff in the Cossijurah case led to contempt proceedings. The main issue in both cases was about jurisdiction. These cases contributed to the passing of which act? It was the Act of Settlement of 1781. The Supreme Court in these cases attempted to expand its jurisdiction beyond Calcutta. That's it for this video. Thank you very much once again for staying through and listening. Again, if you found this video useful in your understanding, Do share it with your friends and subscribe. Take care. Bye bye.